about the excess of votes counted illegally. In fact, Trump asked Raffensperger to find something very specific. And if you might have forgotten what that was, we have that phone call for you right now. Let's listen.
The ballots are corrupt, and you're going to find that they are, and which is totally illegal. It's more illegal for you than it is for them because you know what they did and you're not reporting it. That's a criminal offense. All I want to do is this: I just want to find 11,780 votes, which is one more than we have, because we won the state.
I just want you to find, hold on, let me check, 11,780 votes. I just want you to find those votes for me so we can flip the state of Georgia from voting for Biden to supporting me.
Now, an incredibly important context that his lawyer, of course, is leaving out is it's not.
We use words very loosely in this country. People like to say literally when they mean the opposite. People talk about there's no evidence that the election was stolen. That is incorrect and imprecise, and someone in the media business should not be speaking in such a manner. There's absolutely evidence that the election was stolen. There is not enough evidence to make any serious conclusion that the election was stolen, but there's absolutely evidence. And the analogy I always give is if I'm in the same town where someone gets murdered, that is evidence that I potentially murdered them. Now, you're not going to be able to convict me based on that because that's very, very poor evidence, especially in isolation. But it is evidence. So, for example, to make the point more clear, in the murder trial, right, I could get convicted based on my fingerprints found in the place where the murder happened. I made threats to kill the person just a week prior. I have a very violent past, many multiple assaults. They have a record of me buying a weapon, which seems to match the one that was used for the murder. There are some witnesses that describe someone that they saw lurking around that fit my description. And also, I was in the town. I was confirmed to be in the town where the murder happened. Now, you see what's happening there. In this situation, part of the evidence used to convict me is the fact that I was in the town. So that is evidence that I committed the murder. It is evidence. Like when you look at how do we convict him? Here's all the pieces of evidence. One of them was I was confirmed to be in the town. Now, by itself, it's not enough evidence to really mean anything. Tons of people were in the town where the murder was committed. So my being there is like minuscule evidence, right? Which you can't really do much of anything with. So there's absolutely evidence that the election was stolen. But the evidence is similar to the evidence of me being in the town where the murder was committed. It's kind of like, okay, I was technically there, so I could have killed the person, but if that's all you got nothing. So in terms of the election being stolen, the little pieces of evidence, they didn't really amount to anything. So that being said, I just want to find 11,780 votes. Liberal media loves that phrase. They think it's the smoking gun. It is not. That is Trump being in the town where the murder was committed. That in itself is not really evidence of much. Now, in full context, yes, it is something strong, but only in context of other things. When you look at what Trump knew at the time, what he was told at the time, and all of the little pieces of evidence in terms of what was going on, in that context, that phrase is incriminating. But a lot of liberal media are acting as if the phrase itself is incriminating. The phrase itself is not incriminating because, again, note a couple of details. In this recording, we don't hear him saying anything criminal. It's funny they make the I want to find like that make that sound like it's criminal. He's not saying anything like, I don't care that Joe Biden won. I should be the president. He's not saying stuff like that, right? He's not saying stuff like, I can't believe this guy got more votes than me. We got to flip this. Somehow we got to, like, he's not saying anything like that, right? He, in the recording, now I don't believe it. I think he's playing games. But I believe in objectivity and reality and basing things on facts and not feelings. So even though I look at him as very, very guilty, committing a fraud, I have to put that aside. right? I have to put that aside when I'm doing an analysis of this recording. And in the recording, it seems legit, right? Again, in context, I don't think it's legit. When I look at all the evidence, I'm like, yeah, come on. I'm not buying this, right? But I can't use the recording itself as like, oh, we got him. Because what is he saying in the recording? He doesn't say anything incriminating. He talks about that the election was stolen. I think the one thing that he says that might be, that I would say sounds incriminating is not the finding of the votes. It's not the number either, but what he says after that. He says, which is one more than we got. But even that is not 100% like black and white because, well, first of all, let's get to the fundamental principle of how that statement is not really a smoking gun. Because as I said many times, if the election was stolen from you, if you're running for office, the election was stolen from you, and it's a matter of fake votes or they destroyed votes. The only way for you to rectify the situation is you need to find enough votes to, right? Think about it logically. So you lost by 5 votes, right? And you think it was a fraudulent election, right? So a bunch of fake votes or a bunch of votes for you were destroyed, right? Now, there's actually a second thing that you can use to rectify this. If you can make a strong case and have strong evidence that there's a high probability that a lot of votes were destroyed, right? Like you have somebody recorded saying, I'm going to do it or whatever. You have them on video looking like they're doing it. There's some other discrepancies that seem to match that narrative. Then I think in that scenario, you could open the door to an in-depth investigation, and that evidence could lead to a path that could actually discover the fraud. So we either confirm there's a high probability that a bunch of ballots were destroyed, and then you have to do I don't know what you do in that case. Do you do the election again? Because how do you know how many were destroyed? I don't know how you do that. But at least you could be vindicated in like, okay, this election is now in question, officially in question. Not just me saying it, officially determined in question. Now we need to move towards a resolution of how do we address this? How do we figure out exactly what happened? Now we know something happened. How do we find out what happened? So that's the one way that you could rectify it where it's not specific. But otherwise, the way that you could rectify the situation, the only way you could rectify the situation is, again, you lost by 5 votes. If you believe a lot of votes for you were destroyed, then all you need to do is identify literally one more than you lost by, right? If I lost by 5 and I found 6 ballots that were destroyed, and I can present, hey, here's 6 ballots that were destroyed. You have now essentially proven that you actually won the election. You don't need to find 10, 11, 12, 13. Because here's the thing. There's always going to be election fraud, right? It's generally a very, very small amount, but there's always going to be election fraud. So let's say that a total of 2 people destroyed two ballots, right? And you say, hey, look, we found 2 of these ballots that were stuffed in the garbage. How does that help you? I mean, it could help you in terms of adding suspicion. You're like, if these were destroyed, how many more were destroyed? But that doesn't really, that's very like vague. For all we know, that could be the total amount that were destroyed, right? But if you find an amount that's one more than you lost by, right, then you have proven your case that you actually won the election, right? Which is the point. If he's trying to, if he believes that he won, the only way to make that a reality, to win, is to show an amount of fraud that is at least one more than the margin that he lost by. Logically, there is no other way. Right? Like I said, there's two things, right? You can either demonstrate enough evidence to suggest that the election was fraudulent. So we don't know about the margins and blah, blah, blah. But there's enough evidence here that, wow, something crazy was going on here. This really calls into question the election results. But I think even in that case, because again, I mean, the fact that you found 200, invalid votes or votes that were suppressed, that's not proof that there's 201, 210, 220. That's a proof that there's 200 of them, right? So if the amount that you find is not enough to go over the margin, then how is that helping you? So that's why I say the only thing that's actually incriminating, but it's still very weak, is out of context, right? Is where he says, which is one more than we had. Because if it's one more than you had, then is that him acknowledging that he actually lost? Right? Because he's saying one, we need to find this number, which is one more. And actually, I'm not sure if I'm missing something on that because that doesn't make any sense. If he's saying it's one more than he had, then that will be suggesting that the election was a tie. I didn't think of that before, right? If he's looking for 11,780 and that's one more than he had, then that means he's saying he got 11,779. That's what that sounds like he's saying. He sounds like he's saying is one more than he got. So he's saying that there's 11,779 votes for him that somehow are missing. But he wants to find not the amount that is missing. He wants to find one more than that. So another analysis or interpretation of that would be that he's suggesting that he already found 11,779 votes that were either suppressed or fraudulently placed. So if they can find just one more fraudulent vote, that will be enough to overturn the election. So that's another explanation for what he's saying that might make sense to where he's not actually, doing anything shady. So again, the idea of a smoking gun is something where this looks really, really bad. Not necessarily that it's like 100% like we got you, but it's something that like it's like an extreme threat to you in terms of proving your guilt. That statement alone, almost no threat, in my opinion. Now, remember my perspectives on this. Observe the court case and how things go through. See the discussions about this specific topic and how it's argued in court and what the outcome is, and make your assessment of whether I was onto something or not. At the end of the day, this is not a major deal. I'm just focusing on it because my channel focuses a lot on critiquing media, and I see a lot of media that keeps saying he just wanted to find votes, got him, and I just think that's a incorrect assessment, and showing an inability to think critically by a lot of these folks. That's why I'm focusing on it. But in the grand scheme of things, like, forget about media critique, almost irrelevant. I don't think it's actually a smoking gun, and whether it is or it isn't, not a big deal, because if they win the case, it's not going to be based on this statement, right? They got a lot of evidence and a lot of stuff to make their case, and they're going to win it. If they do win it, they're going to win it based on that, not on this thing, right? So this is really a trivial detail. Again, my focus on it is really just as a critique of the media. That's one way to interpret it. The other way to interpret it is if he's talking about, I'm not really sure. I mean, this is Donald Trump. People like to focus on Biden's age and how Biden says crazy things, but it's hard to find a time where Trump speaks very long without saying something that makes him sound like he's drunk. Now, if you're listening to his words and his performance and you like him, it won't sound like he's drunk. But I think even to you that like him, if you read the transcript of what he said, because reading a transcript doesn't have the impact of his performance and theatrics and tone of voice and speech patterns and these things that are compelling. I always say to people who don't understand, they question, like, what do you mean Trump says crazy things? Like, nothing like Biden. Biden's always lost. I say, read the average transcript of something that Trump says and tell me if it doesn't sound like somebody who's drunk. But you're not going to hear it listening to him live. So the finding votes thing, I think, is not the smoking gun that a lot of these liberals think it is. Now, in a court of law, they're not going to look at that in isolation. They're going to look at it in context of the full body of evidence. And I think with the full body of evidence, I think it's going to add to making a very solid case. But I'm pretty sure a lot of these liberals, they think that phrase itself is like, "Ooh, got him." No, man, it's they react as if it's something like catching him saying, maybe he says something like, I don't like the results of this election. We got to do something about that. Right? That's how they react. Like, that's what he said. Now, if he said that, that's kind of incriminating. I don't like these results. We got to do something about it. Like, what does that mean? That don't sound like somebody that thought they won and it's a fraudulent thing. Because you saying you don't like the results? Now, even that, you can wiggle out of that and be like, he's not defining what he doesn't like. The results of... but even still, I think the word like is very incriminating. Because when you say like, you're talking about a feeling. What does it matter whether you like something or not? What matters is what is. You know what I mean? But either way, if they had him on recording saying that, that's way more incriminating. Or obviously him saying, like, listen, we got to change the results of this election. You know what I mean? He didn't say nothing like that. They wish he said something like that, but as much of a buffoon he is, he ain't that much of a buffoon. So I haven't gotten anyone that's been able to respond to my question, which is, if you believe the election is stolen from you, how else can you rectify it other than finding a certain amount of votes that were destroyed or that are fake that equals one more than the margin that you lost by? That's literally the only way, other than, like I said, finding enough evidence that there seems to be a massive fraud going on so that can open up an investigation. But even still, that's just opening the door to potential resolution. But simply finding evidence that there was like a lot of fraud going on, it's not enough to be like, okay, now you're the president. No, right? The only definitive way is you need to overcome the margin. You either do it by votes counted, or you do it by identifying missing and or fraudulent votes that add up to a number that is greater than the margin you lost by, right? So the statement he made is a statement that someone who is not doing fraud, who actually believes they lost, would say, right? Especially someone who's a buffoon like Trump, who the way he speaks, he just speaks in a very awkward way in terms of substance, right? I mean, he puts on a good performance, so it comes off good to the audience, his target audience. But if you actually look at the substance of what he's saying, he has a very awkward speech pattern. So, him saying those words in that way, because I don't think I would phrase it that way. I'd be a little bit more precise in my wording, but that's me. I'm not Trump. I'm not a buffoon, right? But I just don't think that statement will think it is. In terms of, I think it is what they think it is, but in terms of what he actually means, I think they're accurate. But in terms of incriminating, not quite. We got a lot of incriminating evidence against Trump, which is why he's probably going to lose these cases. Again, I don't think he's going to suffer much consequence, but I think he's going to lose. But that phrase alone, not buying it.